In a book dense with dense chapters, this one is really thick. So the trick is always to hold on to the passages that make sense, and then try to read the ones that don't make sense in light of those, and in light of your sense of the phenomena that Merleau-Ponty is talking about. And then sometimes you just got to throw your hands up and give up and turn the page and come back to it later. He tries to cover so many things in the chapter on the thing in the natural world. There's no possible way we'll get through all of them in 2 days, but we'll hit kind of like the greatest hits. But to get going and to see the really special move that he does throughout the chapter, we need to go back into the space chapter. I almost listened to the entirety of the November 2nd lecture. I didn't get all the way through it, but I know Professor Noe was discussing Merleau-Ponty's core idea of maximum grip or optimal grip. And that is the key move that he recurs to over and over again in the Thing in the Natural World chapter to explain something that we never even notice unless we're doing science or philosophy, to explain the way we perceive stable things with stable shapes and stable colors, even though we're perceiving them from the mobile perspective, limited perspective of our moving body. And along the way, actually towards the end of it, he comes back to this deep philosophical argument that the human body is correlative with the perceived world, that they're interdefined, and that at the same time, in some weird way, the perceived world and the perceived things in it transcend us. They're independent of us. They're objective in some sense. They're real in some sense that's independent of us, while at the same time being interdefined with our body. It's a strange needle he's trying to thread. But the argument, when it comes down to it, is that the phenomenological method that he has and the conception of the human body and its body schema enables him to overcome and undermine the traditional philosophical disputes between realism and idealism. Can he pull it off? I don't know, but he tries, and it's super interesting to see how he does it. And so, in essence, that's the big philosophical issue on the table in the chapter. And if you open the chapter, The Thing in the Natural World, on 312, you can see he's raising this question. He says, throughout this book, we've been emphasizing that the human body perceives things in light of its body schema and its skills, perceives them always in a limited, ambiguous way. And given that we've been saying that, how are we supposed to make sense of the fact that things are real and they're not just a kind of projection, excretion of our body schema and our skills? So he says, even if it cannot be defined as such, a thing has stable characteristics or properties, and we will approach the phenomenon of reality by studying perceptual constants. The perceptual constants, the trio of them is size, shape, and color. That we perceive things as having a constant size, shape, and color, even though we're perceiving them, even though we perceive rather sometimes radical variations in them. We still see them, even though the wall is unevenly lit, we don't perceive it as being unevenly colored. We perceive it as being a uniform, stable color, but unequally lit. That's the phenomenon of color constancy. So he says, he's going to say, what does my view of the human body and its body schema coming to grips with a world in which it is embedded from a mobile, finite perspective, what does my view have to say about the constancy phenomena? And in turn, by the end of the chapter, what does that have to do with the big metaphysical issue about how we're related to the world and at the same time correlative to it, and it's somehow independent of us? I'm going to read the rest of the lines of that opening paragraph. To begin with, a thing has its size and its shape beneath perspectival variations, which are merely apparent. We don't attribute these appearances to the object. They are an accident of our relations with the object, and they don't concern the object itself. What do we mean by this? And on what basis, then, do we judge that a form or a size are the form and the size of the object? That's his relatively surprisingly clear way of saying what I was just trying to say about constancy phenomena. However, in order to build up to what he's doing, and in order not to rob you of a really cool passage at the end of the space chapter, we need to rewind a little bit and go back to what Professor Noe started to talk about the notion of maximum grip, to see how Merleau-Ponty uses the notion of maximum grip to explain perceptual illusion, and then we'll be in a position to jump back into the thing chapter and to see what he does with the constancy phenomena. And I hope that by the end of Tuesday next week, we'll also be chewing on the metaphysical issues about the correlation of the human body in the natural world and things that nonetheless transcend it. The main starring passage about the maximum grip phenomenon, I know Professor Noe read to you, but we need to read it again. It's on page 261. And it's in the end of the top paragraph, about 5 lines from the bottom of that top paragraph. By the way, I've got a question about this, and I'll ask you when I get to it. My body is geared into the world. In French, geared in is the same word as having a grip on, or in grips with. Prise is the word for grip. And the maximum grip is meilleur prise. My apologies to all the French in the world for my accent and spelling. My body is geared into the world when my perception provides me with the most varied and most clearly articulated spectacle possible. Okay, clause 1. Then there's this and. There's a conjunction here. My question is, how do these two parts of the claim relate to each other? I'm going to read the first part again, and then when I get to this and, I want to focus on the second part. My body is geared into the world when my perception provides me the most varied and most clearly articulated spectacle possible. And when my motor intentions, as they unfold, receive the responses they anticipate from the world. This maximum of clarity and perception in action specifies a perceptual ground, a background for my life, a general milieu for the coexistence of my body and the world. So the first part of the claim has to do with we have a stable relation to the object, or when we have an optimal grip on the object, when we can see a balance of its detail and the overall richness of it. So when you can see kind of somebody from enough to get their whole body in view, and at the same time some details of their outfits, of their eyes, of their shoes. So you have some trade-off there between how much of their body you can see, because you got to get them far enough away to see all their body, but then you got to get them close enough to see some of the detail. So that's the maximum of clarity and richness, or how, as he says, the most varied and clearly articulated spectacle here. Then the other part of it is that my motor intentions, as they unfold, receive the responses they anticipate. And that's the phenomenon like when you're walking down the stairs and you expect there to be another stair there, and there's not, but your body is set to step on it again. You stumble. You've lost the grip. That's your motor intention has not received from the world the response it anticipated. But normally, if you're in a place that's familiar to you, your motor intentions receive the responses they anticipate, and you're at grips with the world. Now, I've actually already telegraphed how he uses that to explain perceptual illusion. With that example about the person who's set to keep walking down the stairs and they misanticipate and the step isn't there and so they stumble. In some sense, their body was set and was oriented to a step that wasn't there. And he uses an example a lot like that towards the end of the space chapter. This is on page 310 to 311. I want to say one thing before that. The maximum grip story, just to get you used to it. Maybe you've already been talking about it, but it's also what happens, say, if you want to watch a band and you got a good place up front, and then someone stands right in front of you, and then you have to kind of do this to see the band. Or if you're watching a movie, you've got a sweet view right in the middle of the auditorium, and someone sits right in front of you, without even thinking about it, you shift your body. So the maximum grip, we orient to a maximum grip, normally not by achieving it, but by having a sense of deviation from it. This is his curious, interesting claim that we got to wrap our head around, that we orient to the maximum grip by our sense of deviating from it. And we don't think about that. I mean, sometimes we can think, this jerk has sat in front of me and now I have to crane my neck in order to see the movie. But before we even formulate that thought, our body is already set to get a better look. So our body is oriented to the maximum grip in a special, mysterious way that he thinks is connected with the body schema and connected with the way our body, our natural body, is embedded in and correlative to the world. It has a natural skillfulness to be oriented to its deviation from the maximum grip on the perceptual scene. Okay, that's just to kind of get more of the perceptual maximum grip story in front of us. So I'm on page 310, and this is where he uses this to explain a perceptual illusion, an optical illusion in this case. If I believe I see a large flat stone, I'm in the middle of the page, 310, which is in reality. This is why it connects to the thing chapter, because there's a distinction here between what it appears to be and what it is in reality. And remember, the thing chapter is about what do we experience in reality and how that relates to how we have a maximum grip on things. If I believe I see a large flat stone, which is in reality a patch of sunlight, far ahead on the ground in a sunken lane, I cannot say that I ever see the flat stone in the sense in which I will see the patch of sunlight while moving closer, because it turns out to be a patch of sunlight. You can imagine the scene. There's trees, there's a path ahead, there's a shadow cast on the path, and there's a kind of hole in the shadow that the sunlight's coming through. And from a distance, it kind of looks like a stone on the path. But in reality, it's a patch of sunlight. But from the distance, it's ambiguous. You can't really tell what it is. But in a certain sense, your body is already orienting towards it, and it's already set to step on it, like you are set to step on a stair that's not there. Your body's already orienting in a way. So he says, far ahead on the ground in a sunken lane, I cannot say that I ever see the flat stone, and the sense in which I will see the patch of sunlight while moving closer. The flat stone only appears, like everything that is far off, in a field whose structure is confused and where the connections are not yet clearly articulated. You can see how he's referring to that passage about maximum grip. The scene is not clearly articulated. The richness and the detail are ambiguous. In this sense, then, the illusion, like the image, is not observable. My body is not, I would say, in fact, geared into it. My body is not, in fact, geared into it. But in some weird way, the body thinks it's geared into it, or the body is set to be geared into it. And I cannot spread it out before myself through some exploratory movements. So he's saying, my body's not geared into this thing. If it tries to step on it, it's going to stumble. And continuing the passage, and yet I am capable of omitting this distinction. I am capable of illusion. I'm going to skip a couple lines. Every sensation is already pregnant with a sense. We've already heard about that. That sense is the way you kind of anticipate what's coming next. When he says we look at the circle, we see it as, and we see a curve, we see it as continuing, the arc there, and we see the background as continuing underneath the figure. So our perception is deeply anticipatory. That comes very important in the temporality chapter, because it has to do with how we relate to the future. Every sensation is already pregnant with a sense, inserted into a confused or clear configuration. And there is no sensible given. Now, this is a new claim. The first parts of that are old claims. And there is no sensible given that remains the same when I pass from the illusory stone to the true patch of sunlight. He's saying that even though our body can be set to cope with what turns out to be an illusion, and we can stumble, when we get through the stumbling, we can see that obviously that's a patch of sunlight. There's a transition that happens. That when the illusion is unmasked, we can say, of course that's an illusion. How could I have thought otherwise? But while we're in grips, or while our body is anticipating to be in grips, it can anticipate something that's not there. So he says, I see the illusory stone, I'm 3 lines at the bottom. I see the illusory stone in the sense that my entire perceptual and motor field gives to the light patch the sense of a stone on the lane. And I already prepare to sense the smooth and solid surface beneath my foot. The body is anticipating the stone to be there. Now I'm jumping over to 3:11. I'm just going to read a few more sentences and then pause and then move on to see how the Think chapter works with this. On the top of 3:11, 3 lines down. I say that I perceive correctly, non-illusory. I say that I perceived correctly what's really there when my body has a precise hold, prise, on the spectacle. But this does not mean that my hold is ever complete. We tend towards the precise hold, even if we never achieve it. I'm skipping down to the 10 lines or so. He says, you see it in italics, there's a hyphenated German word, Wahrnehmung. Wahrnehmung is a German word for perception. And it literally means taking to be true. Nehmen is to take, and Wahrheit or Wahr is truth. So he says, the actual realization of the Wahrnehmung, don't worry about all that. He says, and now it permits us to cross out, to cancel out the preceding illusion and hold it to be null and void. I like this next example. I saw a large shadow moving on the periphery of my visual field and at a distance. I turn my gaze to the side, and the phantasm shrinks to its proper place. It was a fly. It was only a fly close to my eye. So just imagine this kind of everyday thing that happens where you see something barely on the periphery and you think it could be some big something or other, shadowy something or other coming at you from the side. And what our perceptual system is naturally tuned to do is turn towards it to try to get more clear about what's there, what's coming at us. So the body has this tendency to get a better grip on what's starting to appear, and it turns, and it's a fly. It cancels out the previous sense that there was some foreboding big something or other, and gets a better grip on what's actually there. So perception consists a lot of the time in these transitions where what's appearing to us is ambiguous and kind of beckoning us to turn our bodies to get a better look at it, to get a better grip on it. And we sometimes go through what you could call an ameliorating transition. It gets better. Perception clarifies itself. It tends to clarify itself. It tends towards a stable equilibrium, a better grip. And it's not just getting clearer about what's out there, it's also being drawn to act in certain ways. And that's why the stone on the path up ahead can be kind of beckoning our gait. And when we get there, we're set to step on it, only to fall in front of us because we realize now that it was just a sun patch. The stone on the path is canceled out, and we have a clearer grip on what's going on. So, illusion is explained by this tendency towards maximum grip and the capacity we have to sense our deviation from it and the capacity we have to cancel out and to transition to a clearer thing, a clearer grip on things, a clearer orientation. That's the explanation of perceptual illusion. I want to use that to transition to the thing in the natural world, but first I want to stop to see if anyone wants to say anything. Because we've been going 20 minutes. Yeah, what's your name? Elvin? Adam, thanks. Yes. Mm-hmm. Yes. Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yes. He likes to use the word soliciting, actually. And so, and you're absolutely right. I mean, that is the phenomenon. And if normally we just don't notice it, it passes beneath the level of our conscious awareness, but our body is tuned to this. And there is this pulling and beckoning towards getting clearer or getting more stable in our perceptual surroundings. The skateboarders, I used to be a skater. It's a good example for phenomenology, but when they're on the board and you see them just modulating their stance, and they're not thinking about how to do that. Snowboarders, surfers, they're all doing this. They're modulating the stance. They're looking for an equilibrium. And they're being pulled to do that, to use your term. They're being solicited to be more stable. And that's what he's talking about. What's your name? John. That is one of the most important, simple, difficult questions of this whole stretch of the book. I hope that we can have a satisfactory answer to it by the end of Tuesday. But I think the answer is we don't know. The body knows. How does the body know? I think Merleau-Ponty would say it's mysterious. I think he was going to say that it's related to the correlation that the natural human body has to the lived world. It's got some knowledge, know-how built into it. All this is still kind of gesturing away from a real explanation in a certain sense, though. There's a footnote in the thing chapter where it's almost like you could hear him accepting an evolutionary story for some of it, because size constancy, that despite the fact that objects cast a larger image on your retina as they come closer, they don't appear to get bigger. They appear to stay the same size, but get closer. But size constancy breaks down. Two examples of that are when you're in an airplane and you're getting off the ground. For a while, everything looks normal. Those are guys on the runway, the crew down there loading the bags, houses, and then suddenly it snaps. The constancy loses its grip and everything looks really small. and looks like a Lego set or something like that. But the more famous example is the moon illusion, that sometimes the moon is low on the horizon and it looks huge. That's the breakdown of size constancy. And Merleau-Ponty argues that size constancy works better for us in a horizontal plane. But when things are coming down on a vertical plane, size constancy doesn't work as well because our body is not habituated to move up and down. Now, some of the other primates are habituated to move up and down. They go up and down in trees. And supposedly there's experimental evidence that shows they have size constancy, that they wouldn't get the moon illusion, in other words. They have better size constancy in a vertical up and down plane. I may as well just show you the footnote. This is footnote 3 in the, in end note 3, sorry. This on page 547. The constancy of forms and sizes in perception is thus not an intellectual function. The intellectualist can't get it right. This is his familiar argumentation. But rather, it's an existential function. That is, it must be related to the pre-logical act by which the subject takes up his place in the world. By placing a human subject at the center of a sphere, upon which disks of equal diameter are attached, it is observed that the constancy is much more perfect according to the horizontal plane rather than according to the vertical. The enormous moon on the horizon and the tiny moon at its zenith are only strange cases of the same law. On the contrary, vertical movement for the monkey is just as natural in the trees as horizontal movement is for us on the ground, and their vertical constancy is just as perfect. And here he refers to the Gestalt psychologist Kafka, principles of Gestalt psychology. So this suggests that perhaps part of the answer has to do with the evolutionary history of this body that we all are. That I guess what they call anatomically modern humans have been around supposedly for something like 200,000 years. It's a pretty long time for the body schema to get capacities for getting a better grip on things. But I don't know if we can accept that as the full answer. But you put your finger on a really important issue. Do you want to say anything back, and then I'll call you?
I was going to say, yeah, that could be a good direction for Merleau-Ponty. Another example of that I thought of would be, I think there's circles that are shaded on the bottom. Mm-hmm. We perceive the circles as protruding. Mm-hmm. Because our bodies are accustomed to having the sun in the surface horizontally. Mm-hmm. We don't see them as a concave, because that wouldn't make sense to the dark to how the shadows.
Yeah, interesting. I have another example of this, but it's not clear in my mind, so I'm going to say something that very likely might be wrong, but it points in the direction of some of us to Google something when we get home. There's been studies that, Alec, maybe you know about this, I don't know, that since Westerners are used to going through a certain kind of doorway, that our perceptual system is attuned to fitting through a certain size opening, that this has influenced our perception of size and shape constancy. I don't know if I have the details of that right, but we should Google it. I can come back on Tuesday and do better with it.
Another example. Isn't that either one or yes, okay, here's the graph. One explanation of that might be you're making assumptions that it means it's kind of natural or this side or how long time it takes to get. But the assumptions you make about that will be influenced by whether you're sort of morning person or night owl.
Oh, right on.
So this is way into the sort of daily routine affecting our perception.
Yeah, and I think ultimately, I don't want to go full naturalist and give a reductive evolutionary account, but we need some combination of what the body has naturally and how it is intermingled with what we learn in our everyday life, in our culture, in our personal habits. The body schema seems to have a deep structure that we all get, because for a lot of things that are just the structure of our body, we move more forward easily than backward because our face is up here. We have a sense of up and down because our head is up here and our feet are down there. There are certain things that are just given to us with the way our body is naturally structured, but we all know that the person, like he has that example of the person with the cane extends their body schema. The woman with the feather in her cap naturally ducks the doorway because her body schema has kind of absorbed her habitual walking around with the feather in her cap. The skateboarder can perceive affordances that the rollerblader can't. So the body schema is also plastic, or it's susceptible to what's training by us. And so anyway, this is a fascinating issue. What's your name again? Ori, yeah. Right. Mm-hmm. It's a really good question. Let me try. This is maybe the best I can do. Maybe you can do better and write a paper about it. But it comes down to the fact that, one of the arguments in this chapter, and it's one of the arguments that's picked up on by Sean Kelly in his paper, Seeing Things in Merleau-Ponty, which is published in the Cambridge Companion to Merleau-Ponty. It's a difficult but fascinating paper, the most clear explanation of what's going on in this, but it's not uncontested. There's another really good paper that came out a couple of years ago by Samantha Mathern called Style as the Key to Perceptual Presence in Merleau-Ponty, and she very compellingly challenges a lot of what Sean Kelly argues. But I'm just putting that out there. This is contested, but here's some of what's going on. The ideal perspective from which to see an object is never actually given in experience. It's a norm that draws us. Merleau-Ponty says it. We can read the passage where he says the real color of something is never given in experience, but it's present in an indeterminate way, like the background continues beneath the figure. If we can get through today to understand what that means, we'll have gone a long way to answering your question. But the argument is that, there might not be any one particular way that you get the maximum grip on some particular object. But your body senses, your body knows in a practical sense that even though you're seeing the mug from a certain angle, that if you reached out and grabbed it, it has a backside. And when you reach out and grab it, you don't expect to find a hole back there. Your hand automatically takes the shape to grab it. And our body then is attuned to there being whole, stable things with stable shape, stable size, stable color. And the fact that we live in a world of stable objects and that our body is able to come to grips with them without us thinking about it shows that it's oriented, here's the kind of tricky move, shows that it's oriented towards an optimal grip on things. Because we sense that the fact that we see the mug from one angle means that we sense a deviation from seeing the whole thing at once. We see it as a full-blooded thing that we can reach over and grab, even though it's at an obscure oblique angle. And the fact that we see just a part of it, but can orient it to it as a full-blooded thing, and our body is ready to grab it, Merleau-Ponty's argument is that that is a sense of a deviation from seeing the whole thing at once. And we don't know what that would be in our mind. We don't have a concept of that, but our body is somehow attuned to it. I think that is, in a way, I've summarized the whole thrust of the lecture that I want to give today by saying that. And I don't think it's very clear yet. And so what I think we should do is go back and lead back up to that step by step. Because what we want to do is explain the passage. I don't know what page it's on, but we're going to get to it, when he says the real color of something is not given in experience. He's saying then that the maximum grip on the color is actually not given in experience. He says we perceive it as a tension that fluctuates around a norm. That's one of the passages. And he says it's present to us in an indeterminate way. In the same way that the background of the figure, or the background behind me, or what's the behind you for me, the background is present to us in an indeterminate way. And when he says that, what he means is that even though we might not see it, our body is ready to cope with it. Our body is ready to deal with it. I know that my body knows that when I open the door and I'm talking to you as we go out the door and not thinking about where we're stepping, the body knows how to continue to step, to walk down the stairs without noticing them. The body is tuned with its skills and its body schema to stable objects and things. And somehow, that's, for Merleau-Ponty, explained because it senses its deviation from an optimum. Let me try to build up to it, because I can say all the words, but it's still hard to see what they mean. What I'd like to do, let's see how we're doing on time. Okay. Go back to page 307. I just want to read one passage that hits on these issues about how somehow the body is naturally attuned to the natural world, to the world in which we find ourselves. On page 307, in the middle of the top paragraph, my body, which assures my insertion within the human world through my habitus, that means through the skills I have for dealing with my social milieu, how to dress, how to talk to people, whether I'm a morning person or a night person, and so forth, only does so by first projecting me into a natural world that always shines through from beneath the others. Then he has this weird analogy that I don't get, but just as the canvas shines through from beneath the painting, and gives the human world an air of fragility. So this is one way of him saying that your body has knowledge of the world, has knowledge that it's related to stable things with stable properties. And his argument is going to be, we don't perceive the wall as unevenly colored. We don't perceive the wall as an uneven color, but an even color unequally lit, because we have a bodily sense of how we would have to move and how the color would have to change in order for us to see it as all the same, in order for it to appear as uniform. The easier way to say that is that if you want to see what color, for example, what color the desk is, your eyes will naturally go to the place where it's most well lit. It's just drawn there. And so the argument, that's a more simple case that he's saying, that the body is drawn to a perceptual experience that reduces a sense of deviation from the optimal. Anyway, let's see if we can get better at it. I'm going to skip some stuff here, but the setup of the thing in the natural world chapter is pretty familiar by now, where he says, here's a phenomenon, the phenomenon of size, color, and shape constancy. The empiricists have an argument about how to explain it, and it has something to do with having a memory and then substituting in your experience your memory. And that's why we perceive things as evenly colored but unevenly lit, because our memory fills in how it's supposed to work. I don't want to go into the details of it, but it's on the bottom of page 313. The intellectualist also has a way of saying it. The intellectualist says, no, it's not by substituting a memory we've experienced in the past. It's because your mind applies a rule. And the rule then says something about how to keep the shape as continuous, even though the perspectival variations are hitting our retina. Keep the color as the same, even though it's unevenly lit. The mind has a rule to follow, or these days you would say the brain is doing a calculation. He says, so you've got an intellectualist move, an empiricist move. He says neither of them explain the phenomenon. They both presuppose what they're meant to explain, and we should reject them. So all of that happens on 313, 314, 315. I would rather not go into the detail, so I'm not gonna. We need to go faster. On the bottom of 315, he suddenly switches to giving his own view. There's one line where he's starting to transition. In the middle, and I guess it's in the bottom third of that long, dense paragraph. He says, far from reducing down to constant relations, that's what he says the intellectualist does, the constancy of relations is grounded in the evidentness of the thing. All right, well, what's the evidentness of the thing? Then you got to jump down to the end of this page, 3 lines to the bottom. The privileged perception assures the unity of the perceptual process and gathers all the appearances into itself. For each object, just as for each painting in the art gallery, there is an optimal distance from which it asks to be seen, an orientation through which it presents more of itself, beneath or beyond which we have merely a confused perception due to excess or lack. So that's the maximum grip story, but that's another one of the starring passages where he introduces the sense that, visually speaking, if we keep with the visual case, that if you're too close, you get too much detail and you can't tell what you're looking at. But if you back up, you can see the overall shape of what you're looking at, but you don't see the detail. And so there's a trade-off. And he says that trade-off is going to give you the maximum grip. And that your perceptual system is oriented towards that maximum grip, that maximum presentation. And somehow that explains the constancy phenomena. Let me see where else we can go. .316. Yeah, it's about 10 lines down from where we were. The distance between me and the object is not a size that increases or decreases, but rather a tension that oscillates around a norm. The oblique orientation of the object in relation to me is not measured by an angle that it forms with the plane on my face, but experienced as a disequilibrium, as an unequal distribution of its influences upon me. So, if I see the shape of my iPhone, which normally if I'm looking straight down on it, it's a rectangle, but now it's got an oblique angle because it's sitting on the lectern. The intellectualist is going to say that the oblique orientation is measured by an angle that it forms with the plane of my face, and that the mind or the brain has a formula for calculating how to correct for that. So I don't see it as a distorted shape. I still see it as the same shape. My mind is doing some operation to fix it. Merleau-Ponty says, no, rather than that, the oblique orientation is experienced as a disequilibrium, an unequal distribution of influences upon me. And his argument is going to be instead that I see it as oblique because my body knows that if I were to get a different look on it, it would retake its normal rectangular shape. My body has a sense of how it's deviating from that presentation. And that explains the shape and the size constancy. Alec. Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Okay, but then on the other hand, you body it. Doesn't get rid of the rules, but I think it's something that come up with rules that body seems to do.
Mm-hmm.
I just wonder what how you decide to see if there's how you get a good sense of what the difference is.
I guess I would say two things as just pointers for where to go with that. One of them is that, I mean, Merleau-Ponty doesn't talk about this, but if we want to be sympathetic to his views and update them, certainly the brain has a role to play. And we would be laughing stocks, rightfully so, if we wanted to say the brain has nothing to do with it. But then the question is, what role is the brain playing? Two things to say there. One, what we don't want to do, what we need to do is locate the brain in the organism as a whole. It's not the brain that's doing anything by itself. The brain by itself is useless. It's the brain connected with the nervous system of the body, of the organism, in its familiar milieu that is doing stuff. That's the basic move of so-called 3E cognitive science: enacted, extended, and embodied. And that's all very influenced by Merleau-Ponty. So we don't want to get rid of the brain, but we don't want to be reductionists about it. And we need to locate the brain and what it's doing in the organism as a whole. Then there's the other question, which is being fought out still, is what is the brain actually doing? Is it processing representations? Or is there a different, and representations in that case would be processing rules and so forth, like computers are doing? Or is the brain somehow doing something else? Is it functioning in a way that's non-representational? And there's a lot of research about that too, like the neural net paradigm about the brain, where you get connections built up through experience that are then drawn upon and can be shown to work, but without there being a rule or a representation doing so. That's in Dreyfus works on this in that paper, Merleau-Ponty in Cognitive Science. So, I don't know. That's the direction that I would push in. Okay. And this is connected to what we were just saying, that it's not just the brain doing stuff, it's the organism. The organism in a body, moving around, seeing things from a particular finite perspective, not having a God's eye view from above or outside the world, but being immersed in the world, pursuing its projects, having a finite vantage point, and seeking to maintain an equilibrium. And we see him saying this kind of thing on 317, on that full paragraph, the big one. My experience opens onto things and transcends itself in them because it always accomplishes itself within the framework of a certain arrangement with regard to the world. That is the definition of my body. Sizes and forms only serve to modalize this overall hold on the world. That didn't say what I wanted it to say. Okay, yeah, it's down a bit more in the paragraph. The system of experience is not spread out before me as if I were God. It is lived by me from a certain point of view. I am not the spectator of it, I am a part of it. And it is my inherence in a point of view that at once makes possible the finitude of my perception. It doesn't only make it possible, it imposes it. And its opening onto the total world as the horizon of all perception. I don't want to get into the total world as the horizon of all my perception now, but what I wanted to say is that his explanation of the constancy phenomena has to do with our being embodied, finite, moving around, coming to grips with things, not our being disembodied intellects, following rules or substituting memories. Now let's go to the example of color, and we'll get to the core issue and see if we can explain it better. So you know what the phenomena of color constancy is. He goes through the argument on page 318 of what an empiricist would say and what an intellectualist would say. I'm going to skip it. He gives his view on 319 at the end of that top paragraph. The real color remains beneath the appearances, just as the background continues beneath the figure. That is, not as a quality that is seen or conceived, but rather as a non-sensorial presence. This is a weird thing to say. I want to say it again. The real color remains beneath the appearances, just as the background continues beneath the figure. Now, remember what he says about how the background continues beneath the figure. This was early on in the book where he says, imagine a dot on the wall. It's part of our sensory experience that we always perceive a figure against a ground. He thinks it's just part of the basic structure. It's a phenomenological fact. And when we see an object, we only see the front side of it. We don't see the back side of it. And if you get into an analytic point of view, you can say, well, what's my relation to the back side of the object? Do I add it on with a thought? Do I substitute a memory that I had from it from the past? Or is the background present to me, like really present to me, but in a non-sensorial way? I have a sense that there's a back of this object. I don't see it as a mere facade. I see it as a thick, full object. And in what sense is that true? Because my body is set to grab it. The back is given to me because I have a sense that if I walked around it, I would get a better look at it. If I grabbed it, I would have something to hold on to. It's present to me in a way that's soliciting me to get a better grip on it, to use the terminology of the chapter. And so now he's saying the real color is present in the same kind of way. The real color of the wall, even though it looks unevenly lit, even though it looks, if you put on your scientific mind and you say the wavelength of the light coming at my eyes is different, yet I see it, and if I try hard and I squint and I break it up, I see that it's unevenly colored. It looks to be unevenly colored all over. But my body is set to relate to it as a stable color. And the real color, my body is in a way then relating to the real color of the wall in the same way that it's relating to the back side of the object. That it's there for me because I have a sense for how the conditions would need to improve for me to get a better grip on it. I would have to walk around the side and then I would see the back side. So that's how you have a sense of the background of the object. You can sense, your bodily senses, how you could get a better grip on it. And now he's saying, with lighting, it's the same. We have a bodily sense of how to get a better grip on it. Part of that has to do with the way your eyes naturally go to the more well-lit part to see what the color is. And that's his claim. Let's see if we can make it any more clear. Does anyone have anything to say for the time being? What's your name again? Ori. Yeah. I'm not experiencing a kind of tension going back to the life that I would have the fun. Mm-hmm. It really seems like that's what I mean a lot of times in the background. That light is kind of like the real color. Yes. It's not like that. John. No, that's John. You're Adam. Thanks. Yes. Mm-hmm. Yep. Yes. Yes. Exactly. That's when that happens. When your perceptual system resets, so that it takes yellow then as the background color. He thinks that's part of the phenomenon of getting a better grip on what's going on, that your system is adjusted. And before that, when the colors look really off, or look from out here, it would look super blue out there because our perceptual system is set. He says it gets set to a certain level. He has a whole discussion of this, but absolutely right to point in that direction. Let me read what this says on my notes. The real color is not given in experience, actually. The color on which we would have the most maximum grip is never actually given in experience. Just like the background, we always see things as having a backside that we don't actually see, but it's still present to us in an indeterminate way. The real color is never given focally in experience. It's present to us as the background of our experience. And we sense how the colors we're seeing now deviate from it. The real color is never given descriptively or focally in experience. Just as the background continues behind the object in a way that is indeterminately present and indeterminately given. It's an indeterminate presentation. We always see from a limited perspective. We can never capture the whole water bottle in one view because we're embedded and embodied in our situation. So we always see that, so we will actually never have the full, perfect grip visually, or if I had bigger hands, maybe I could grab more of it, but we would never visually have the full grip. We will never visually see the real color of this thing. It's never actually given an experience because of the finitude of our embodiment. But we're somehow oriented to the real shape and the real color. Since we always see from our limited perspective, not everywhere at once, and we have a bodily sense of how we would have to move in order to see the back, we have a bodily sense of how the lighting conditions would have to change in order to see the color as even. This is what the indeterminate presence of the background means. That's why he's drawn to this metaphor. So in other words, the real color, as he puts it a couple of pages ago, the real color is actually a norm. It draws us. We're oriented to it. We sense how we deviate from it. A norm is a sense of how things should be, as opposed to how they are. The norm would be, we would achieve the norm. We would have a null deviation from the norm in the sense of having the fullest possible maximum grip on it. For color, that would be seeing it in the best possible lighting context. So we sense how we're deviating from that when we see the color as uniform, constant, but unevenly lit, rather than seeing it as differently colored. We sense how we would have to move, or how the context would have to change in order for the color to be given more optimally. Okay, I've said that a million different times. I think it's starting to make more sense, but it's still a really weird thing to try to wrap your head around. Should we move on to a different phenomenon, or do you want to talk about color anymore? What's your name? Sean.
I guess I'm just wondering how, or what account Merleau-Ponty did for us to find out what norm by this, what is up with this color?
Yeah, that's that hard question again. I can point you to the direction of where he says some weird sounding things that would gesture in the right direction. But we never, he's got this strange argument that we never experience. Look, sometimes he actually does say, he's inconsistent in how he says this, so I want to be more careful. Sometimes he says that we do achieve a maximum grip on the color. There's at least one time where he says that. But then he has that other sentence where he says the real color is present to us. So one time he says the real color is given when we achieve that balance between clarity and richness. But then the other time he says, no, we never achieve that in the same way that we never see the background of an object because we're perceiving from a finite point of view. So the question always is, the question that's come up a few times is, how do we know what that norm is? How does the body know what the norm is in order to account for it? What he answers is that the body schema knows. We know that it knows because we sense a sense of deviation. We sense that there's a background to the water bottle, even though we don't see it. Our body is geared into it because it can grab it. We have a sense that we walk around, we can see it. So in some sense, we know that it's oriented towards these indeterminate presences around us. How does it know that? He doesn't have an answer. He doesn't venture one. Does that make his account, does that weaken his account? Maybe. But let me read you a funny thing that he says on page 274. His basic argument is that the body schema knows that it's got a knowledge, a know-how about the world that enables us to experience stable objects with stable colors and stable shapes. And it's built in to what it means. It's built into our embodiment. And so then he has all these funny things, funny ways of trying to say that. And on page 274, he has one of my favorites. This is where he's talking about depth, but we don't want to get into that. But he says, in the middle of that bottom paragraph, he says, depth is born before my gaze because my gaze attempts to see something. But what is this perceptual genius at work in our visual field that always tends towards the more determinate? So here he's calling our body is this kind of perceptual genius that tends towards determinate objects, that has a draw towards determinate colors and determinate shapes. And how does it do it? It's a perceptual genius. This is him. He comes up with these metaphors when he can't have a deeper explanation. On 276, he says it again. This perception, at the top of 276, this perceptual genius underneath the thinking subject, who knows how to give the things the correct response that they are waiting for in order to exist for us. See, I can give you one or two more. 341. Okay. I'm on now page 341. At the end of that top little paragraph fragment, my gaze knows, in scare quotes, what such a patch of light signifies in such a context. And it understands the logic of illumination. That's a way of saying that our gaze, our embodied gaze, knows in some way that the lighting context is presenting this color as deviating from an optimal norm, and it senses how it would have to adjust that. And that's how it sees that that's a darker lit surface than the other side. The perceptual system knows. And then he says it in a more robust way in the middle of that next paragraph on 341. To have a body is to possess a universal arrangement. This sounds mysterious. A schema of all perceptual developments and all intersensory correspondences beyond the segment of the world that we're actually perceiving. Thus, a thing is not actually given in perception. This is an amazing claim. He's saying the real thing. He makes the same claim that he says about colors, about things. The real thing is not given in perception, but it's a norm, a sense that we sense we're deviating from. It is not given in perception. It is inwardly taken up by us. I don't like that phrase. Reconstituted and lived by us insofar as it is linked to a world whose fundamental structures we carry with ourselves, and of which the thing is just one of several possible concretions. I don't know what that means. Although lived by us, the thing is no less transcendent to our life, because the human body, along with its habits that outline a human environment around itself, is crossed by a movement towards the world itself. So the line I want to emphasize again is that the body is linked to a world whose fundamental structures we carry with ourselves. I've now leapfrogged into the bigger metaphysical issue, because we've been saying, does he have an evolutionary account? Does he have a hand gesture away that he's saying, look, I don't have an explanation, but I have metaphors to talk about it, the perceptual genius, the anonymous structures that one perceives in me. And now he's going for a more bold, wild claim that this is the non-dualism claim that Professor Noe was talking about, that we're not in the world like the marbles are in a jar. Our body is not located in the world like the dirty dishes are in the sink. It's not just there in an empty container. The body is somehow metaphysically intertwined with the world in which it is immersed. And because of that, it has the logic or the pre-logic of what it's perceiving, and it has an intimate way to be in touch with it. When you reject the dualism that's come down to us from the Cartesian tradition, which says that the mind is different than the body, and that the body is different than the world. When you reject that, then what are you going to do? You're pressured to give an alternate account of how we relate to the natural world. And I think that's what it's coming down to. If you read later Merleau-Ponty, he has an unfinished book called The Visible and the Invisible. He goes even more wild in this direction. And he starts talking about what he calls the flesh. And the flesh is something like the co-substance we are, that we're not actually different than the stuff. We're not different than the trees and the grass and the birds and the bees. We're part of the same stuff. And he calls that the flesh. And here he's almost going in that direction. Anyway, it's almost like a metaphysical punt as a way to answer the question that's been coming up. But I think that's what he's trying to do here. Does anyone know what time it is? So we have 9 minutes. Okay. Does anyone else want to say anything, or should I go back and summarize and say a few things? We'll continue next time to do more detail. We'll talk about the lighting context and that phenomenon that about when your perceptual system gets used to yellow lights and the sun goes down, that things look really blue outside. We want to talk more detail about his explanation of that. We want to talk more about how all of this is related to not just that we are oriented to the backsides of objects, even though we don't see them. They're present to us in an indeterminate, non-sensorial way. The other major part of his view is that the holism of the perceptual context, and that the fact that we perceive things as constant colors also has to do with the way that the lighting source is present in our visual field, the way that other objects are between us and what we're looking at. It's important for his overall view to have this deep holism and the deep sense of the whole perceptual context to explain what these phenomena are. And we will talk more about his fascinating view that I want to try to make less weird sounding, that the perceived world is correlative to our body and at the same time transcendent to it. I want to connect that to the non-dualism that Professor Noe has mentioned, and to the tradition that's coming out of Heidegger before him, and perhaps Nietzsche before that, of really questioning the separation between mind and body and world, and to see what do we need to say to really take seriously that we're enmeshed in the world and not separate from it, that the mind is part of the body and not something that's free-floating from it. That's what's at stake in the later part of the chapter. For my purposes, you don't have to read the part on hallucination. I'm going to skip it. But I would really recommend you read the last couple of pages of the chapter and do what you can to read (3:12) to 3:41. Yeah, I mean, if you get to 3:49, you'll get to read some of the metaphysical sounding stuff too. So, wait, do we still have 10 minutes? Okay, we're done. If we have any more time, I'm happy to talk more, but as far as I can tell, the class is over.